USC goes to the desert, doesn't come up empty. It's a close one, though, 31-29 at one point in the fourth quarters. They then tack on a couple touchdowns and keep Arizona at arm's length for the rest of the contest to march on to 7-1. Welcome to USC Trojans Live right here at the Voice of College Football for a 26th edition. We've got Matt Zemek on the line, of course, from Trojans Wire, and without him, we don't have a show, so we always appreciate Matt making this thing happen. Matt, how you doing tonight?
Doing all right on this Halloween night, and
Yep.
we're out here in the West and just dealing with trick or treaters while setting up this podcast. Or this broadcast. So that's why we're a little late here at the Voice of College Football. So a little more trick than treat, but it certainly is a treat to have our live show here on the Voice of College Football.
Yeah, and depending on where you are throughout the country, and various locations and districts have their own hours and so forth. For us, it was over the weekend. It was a Saturday festivity, despite it technically being Halloween here on the 31st on a Monday. Well, yes, the trick or treat did not bite USC in the backside, as was possible in a maybe closer than expected game against Arizona. The defense had some issues, of course, but Caleb Williams with a heroic effort on the offensive side. And certainly he was fired up. You could see that on that final game-clinching first down run when he threw a celebratory fist in the air, and USC relieved to take this one home. 45-37, the final score. So, Matt, your impressions of the effort?
Yeah, this was just a game to survive. And let's be honest, going into this game, it seemed likely that Eric Gentry and Jordan Addison were not going to play. They were both hurt late in the Utah game. Everyone knew that. The real surprises were the Mario Williams and Andrew Voorhees injuries. Those were surprises. Those caught everybody off guard. And so when those injuries were announced, okay, so we're now down both star receivers, not just Addison, but also Mario Williams as well. So you don't have your two best wide receivers. But the most concerning injury, even more concerning than Eric Gentry, who's such a central player on the defense, like the traffic cop, and also a guy who deflects lots of passes and is very disruptive, can cover lots of ground with his long strides. The biggest injury of all of them was Andrew Voorhees, because he's their best offensive lineman. He's their best NFL prospect. Along the offensive line, at least. Addison's also an elite NFL prospect. Realizing right before the game that you're not going to have your best offensive lineman, that was really concerning. And so we saw a lot of reshuffling on the offensive line. So Mason Murphy, he played briefly at left tackle against Fresno State in week 3. That was the game in which Cortland Ford was hurt. And Bobby Haskins got slightly injured in the first half. So they tried to see what they could get from Mason Murphy in that week 3 game against Fresno State a month and a half ago. Didn't turn out well. Like he got bullied, and he was still early in his evolution. And so they needed to bring him along slowly. So here we are a month and a half later. They started him at right tackle. So they didn't have him at left tackle. Bobby Haskins is starting this game at left tackle on Caleb Williams' blind side. But Mason Murphy was in at right tackle, and he did commit a holding penalty, which wiped away a touchdown. But other than that, he held up pretty well. And you had other reshuffled assignments along the offensive line. I just learned right before we came on the air, Mark, that Jonah Monheim graded out to a 95. So highest grade ever. It was his first grade in the 90s. Like, he was spectacular. And Lincoln Riley had a lot of good things to say about him. And so, and Haskins, he got hurt, I think it was early in the fourth quarter, midway through the second half. So Cortland Ford came off the bench, hadn't played very much over the past 4 weeks. And could he hold it together? Could he help this offensive line in the fourth quarter, milk the clock, add another score? Yes, he could. He helped on the final scoring drive for USC that established the 45-29 cushion. So when Arizona scored 8 points to make it 45-37, that last touchdown really was the final score that USC needed to, as you said, keep Arizona at arm's length. So Cortland Ford back in the mix. And so if you have Cortland Ford playing at a high level, well, that will, minimize the sting of the Bobby Haskins injury at left tackle. So this offensive line was challenged. Lots of new roles, new positions. Mason Murphy, thrown into the fire with Andrew Voorhees out, and they passed the test. And so Josh Henson, the offensive line coach, we all wondered how good a hire this was. And, the starting five along the offensive line entering day one on Labor Day weekend, the starters figured to be good. It's when you got deeper into the depth chart, how would this group perform? So with Mason Murphy playing a solid game at right tackle, like that's a big source of encouragement. So if USC loses a starter, there's a better chance that Mason Murphy can fill in, and there won't be too much of a drop off. So that's really big news for this team right now. And then you figure that Voorhees, all right, he missed the Arizona game. You don't have. This is where the schedule really helps out. You don't have to rush him back for Cal, right? You don't have to say, "Well, we got it. We got to play him this week." No, you don't. And so if Haskins is hurt, so you already have Mason Murphy. You can probably throw Gino Quinones, who's gotten some spot duty, into the mix. And against Cal, and then the next week against Colorado, should be able to get by. And hopefully the big picture, and we're going to talk about this with other position groups and other injuries, just having this Cal-Colorado on-ramp to the UCLA game, it really gives USC like a 2-week period of safety, a 2-week cushion or buffer, so that you can get your roster as healthy as possible heading into UCLA. Now, I would say you want to get guys some reps before the UCLA game so that they don't enter that game cold, but you certainly don't have to overextend them, right? You don't have to really push it with them. So Lincoln Riley does have some flexibility. It could obviously be a concern if guys can't play period, at all. You probably want to get them some snaps to see where they are, but you don't have to ride them too hard before the UCLA game on November 19th, which clearly, that's going to be the season, for the Pac-12, for the New Year's Six Bowl. So many different prizes, so many different goals flow in and through that UCLA game. So having this Cal-Colorado on-ramp and being able to just stay at home in Los Angeles for the whole month of November, hopefully that'll be the thing that gets guys healthy. And that's what also makes this Arizona game not too much of a concern. I mean, the concern really is the health more than the team. You knew as soon as those Mario Williams and Andrew Voorhees injuries were announced on Saturday. This could get really dicey, and it did. That's normal, okay? If they had everybody healthy and you beat Arizona by only 8, that's a problem with the team. But this is a problem of health. This is a problem of attrition. So, we'll obviously find out against UCLA in 3 weeks. But right now, it's really about getting guys healthy. And if guys don't get healthy, that's really more of a concern than the team, because the coaching staff has shown a steady hand. The coaching staff has been able to deal with all these injuries and all these roster disruptions. And Alex, let's shift to defense now, Mark. Alex Grinch was like a mad scientist in this game. And it's notable that, he did not coach a good game against Utah. He was expecting Utah offensive coordinator Andy Ludwig to run the ball, so he never really adjusted. He was continually playing the run. Utah kept throwing it. That's why Dalton Kincaid had 16 catches for, several hundred yards and just destroyed them. But that game actually helped Alex Grinch here, because Arizona has to throw the ball to succeed, has to light up the scoreboard, given how bad its defense is. And Jaden DeLora and his receiving core were spectacular. They were making one-handed highlight reel grabs. So on several plays, you just had to tip your cap to the Arizona receivers. Obviously, there were plenty of other plays that USC could have made on defense and didn't. There were about 20 missed tackles. I saw somewhere on Twitter. And also, Arizona was making big plays downfield. The pass rush got a few sacks late. Shane Lee made a big late sack. Nick Figueroa got in there, made a sack, but lots of sacks that weren't finished. And that really is the number one thing that needs to change. And you can blame the secondary for a lot of the big plays that Arizona made downfield, but if the pass rush finishes the sack on Delora, then the secondary doesn't have to worry about it. But to get back to, the injury situation and having basically no linebackers. I mean, Shane Lee's still not 100% physically. So you had no Gentry, you had no Raylan Goforth. So Alex Grinch had some 4 safety looks, a lot of dime packages. He was flooding the field with corners and safeties to guard against the pass because, if you give up a 5-yard handoff to Arizona, that's okay because that means that you're not giving up a 25-yard pass down the field. So, that was a lesson learned from the Utah game. And Alex Grinch was just scrambling. He was scrambling in this game because this was just about surviving, getting out of Tucson, and getting home to Los Angeles for November with the softer schedule to start these next few weeks. So, so Josh Henson managing the O-line and all the reshuffled assignments with the Voorhees injury, and Alex Grinch just scrambling madly in the secondary to find solutions with the pass rush not getting home as much as it needed to, having basically no linebackers. USC was just scrambling, and the coaching staff held it together. The coaching staff continues really to make the grade. Lincoln Riley's hires were legitimately questioned. It was fair to question whether Alex Grinch had earned coming over from Oklahoma as defensive coordinator. And right now he's living up to Lincoln Riley's trust, and Josh Henson on the offensive line, he's living up to it too. These hires, legitimately scrutinized. You could have made a case that, USC needed to aim higher. They are doing the job. And as a result, we're looking at a team that is very, very likely to be 9-1 through 10 games heading into the rivalry double stack, UCLA and Notre Dame. This is what USC is supposed to be, right? This is where USC football is supposed to be when we get into November, when the days get shorter and the situations get more urgent. This is how it's supposed to be in Los Angeles. It's truly a measure of the extent to which USC football is back.
Most of those 25-yard throws downfield from Jaden Delora that Matt mentions were headed in the direction of one Dorian Singer. I had tweeted out during the game that because a lot of people that follow me and follow the Voice of College Football outside of this USC channel, not aware of some of the better players out there in the Pac-12, and Dorian Singer made some remarkable catches. Pretty much anything in his vicinity he was bringing down, and I wanted to point people to one of the better players in the Pac-12 into a game that a lot of people kind of wrote off as a USC win for sure. That was pretty exciting there midway through the fourth quarter. Matt's here breaking down USC football. We do this each and every Monday night at 11 o'clock Eastern Time, 8 o'clock Pacific Coast. We've got Jay Curtis joining us here in just a couple minutes from Cal Sports Report. Of course, the Golden Bears at 3-5 come to the LA Coliseum on Saturday as a 19.5-point dog. I wanted to hit a few points before we bring in Jake. Was there anything with the officiating? I saw some headlines, not anything that I had time to really delve into. And certainly considering what happened at Utah a few weeks ago and what the narrative is overall about Pac-12 officiating, was there another incident here on Saturday?
There was, and so for anyone who missed it, all right, here's the deal. USC gets a first down deep in Arizona territory with 5 seconds left on the clock at the end of the first half. All right, 5 seconds. So the USC's offensive unit rushes down, ready to snap the ball. And again, this was a first down play, so the clock stops. All right, there's no debate here. You have enough time to snap the ball, clock it, and set up for a field goal. So what happens? Before the officials mark the ball ready for play, the clock starts. All right, the chains were not set, ball was not marked ready for play, and the clock starts. So that's number one. So the quick trigger home clock operator in Tucson for the Wildcats. But then secondly, the clock starts and the referee stands over the ball. And Mark, you might remember this, and other people who watch Pac-12 football in the state of Arizona might remember this. The Wisconsin-Arizona State game.
I knew you were going there. Yep.
2014, I think it was, or
Yeah.
13 or 14,
Yeah.
with the officials standing over Wisconsin's ready to snap the ball and spike it at the end of the game to set up a field goal. The officials just standing there, preventing it from happening. Clock runs out, and like, what the hell? All right. So, absolute total disaster of game management. But, with the clock running out and everything, and the whole mess with the chain gang and marking the ball ready for play, et cetera, none of that's the worst thing about all of this. The worst thing is everyone in the stadium in Tucson and everyone watching on television could tell, okay, this game management thing got totally screwed up. Like, all right, that happens. The clock will run out. The clock runs when it shouldn't. All right, so you fix it. Like, that's the thing. Of course, you're going to talk to the press box, the coordinators, the supervisor. You're going to get on the horn. We're just going to, like adults, all right, so the clock ran out, but we'll fix it. We'll put the seconds back on. Not a problem. The basic game administration, you're going to correct the error. No, the officials go to the tunnel at halftime. What the hell? That is the thing. And just to draw a connection to the Utah game, when I was, much more of the belief that like the refs really took that away from USC against Utah than many others were. And the point I tried to emphasize 2 weeks ago here at the Voice of College Football, and in response to the Utah game, it was that they admitted that they were wrong on the targeting, talking about the roughing the passer call in the fourth quarter, which gave Utah the ball back. Utah was going to punt, so that roughing the passer call gave Utah a sustained possession. It affected a change of possession in the fourth quarter. They admitted they were wrong on the targeting call in the fourth quarter, but they kept the penalty. There was no basis for keeping the penalty. There was nothing about the hit was delivered with or to the helmet. All right. So there was nothing about the play which merited keeping the penalty in place. The vast majority of the time when targeting is rescinded, the penalty is also rescinded. And so, in other words, they reviewed the play, Mark. They had a chance to look over the play, and they admitted they got it wrong, and they stuck the penalty in. So the connection here is, in this Arizona situation, okay, so an initial error was made, but then we conferred, and the refs talked to Lincoln Riley on the field, before going to the tunnel, and they said, well, actually, no, we're not going to go back and rectify this situation. We're just going to go on in to halftime. This is the nuance that's getting missed. Calls get blown all the time. Mistakes get made all the time. But when you have a chance to review your mistake and correct it, and you don't, like that is how conspiracy theories persist. That is how people get the belief that, people are really intent on, jobbing USC. And I don't think the officials tangibly think, let's stick it to USC because it's leaving the Pac-12. I don't think any official or officiating crew thinks that way. But when you have an obviously correctable error and you don't then correct it, when you have the chance to do so, like it was perfectly within procedure, within the rules to rescind the 15-yard penalty against Utah. It was perfectly within the rules and within procedure to put 5 seconds back on the clock at the end of the first half. And given that administrative opportunity to fix your error, you don't. Like that is a far more serious problem than, maybe your eyesight's not great and you don't make the right ruling on pass interference, holding, etc. So like just as Utah fans were saying, but they missed several holding calls against USC. Well, they did, but not everything is the same. When you have a chance to review your error and you've made an error and you don't correct it, that is several orders of magnitude greater in terms of an officiating failure. And it allows people to think that there is intent in terms of wanting to shape the outcome. So that is the nuance that I think not enough people still appreciate. It's not about getting the call wrong. It's about being able to fix the call that you know is wrong and you still don't do anything about it. That is the nuance with Pac-12 refs and the horrible relationship with USC over these past 2 games against Utah and Arizona.
It's a fast game played by big, fast athletes, so we can understand the in the moment issues and misses because it happens just in a blink of an eye. But that's why we've got replay and review, and that should be airtight. All right, folks, we've got Herman, we've got Daniel with questions. We'll get to those in just a second, but we would like to bring in our guest here. Tim, we appreciate you imploring everyone to, of course, hit the like button and support us here at the Voice of College Football. Get on out to more Trojan fans and Pac-12 fans. Bring them in here every Wednesday, my goodness, I do too many shows, Matt. Every Monday night at 11 Eastern Time, 8 Pacific. We got Jake Curtis on the line from Cal Sports Report. Jake, we appreciate you being here tonight. Jake, can you hear us? Uh-oh. Jake, are you with us? Can you hear us? Hello, Jake. Unfortunately, I don't know that Jake can hear us.
Hey, it's
Jake,
Dana from StreamYard. Today we're going to go through everything you need to know to go live. Let's go. Before we enter the studio to do a complete walkthrough of all StreamYard's features, we've got to create a broadcast first.
Okay, so we're going to put Jake back into the backstage area. Fortunately, we hope he works that issue out. So let's get to a few questions here. And one, Daniel Howard. This may be a bit nitpicky, but it's more about the process than it is that knowing that the specific ranking will not matter in a few weeks. It should be corrected based on who wins the Pac-12 and who wins a championship game and all of that. But as it currently stands, we've got Oregon 1 spot above USC in both the coaches poll and the AP poll. And Daniel's asking, okay, Oregon lost by 46 points to a team that barely beat Missouri, while USC lost by 1 point. How is Oregon ranked over USC?
I don't have a problem with ranking Oregon over USC, Daniel, for the simple reason that Oregon beat UCLA. So that is a high-end win that USC does not yet have. Now, USC might soon beat UCLA, and USC will be able to burnish its resume, but USC doesn't have that really shiny high-end poker chip style win yet, and Oregon does. So I'm absolutely fine with Oregon being ranked over USC for that reason. But the other thing is, like, we are headed for, and I certainly hope we're going to get this. And I think it's pretty likely. Or I don't think Oregon's going to lose before November 19th. I don't think Utah's going to lose before November 19th. USC is definitely not going to lose before November 19th. And UCLA is probably not. But that Arizona State game, which we could talk about later, could get a little interesting for reasons we can explain later on in the show. But if none of those teams lose these next 2 weeks, November 5, November 12, we're going to have showdown Saturday in the Pac-12 with Utah at Oregon, USC at UCLA, basically semifinals, Pac-12 semifinals, essentially, not technically, but essentially, but 2 games where teams are going to have a chance to play their way into the Pac-12 championship game. So that's going to resolve most of this. And then, of course, we'll have the Pac-12 championship game, but like November 19th is going to shake things up. It's going to elevate 2 teams and it's going to knock out 2 others. So this is going to resolve itself. But if you're talking about the Oregon USC rankings debate, Oregon beat UCLA. When you look at the Pac-12 this year, it's a top-heavy league, and that's not usually the case. Usually the Pac-12 cannibalizes itself. You have a big mishmash of teams. You have a lot of 2-loss teams in the league, and one team usually slips through and gets to be 8-1. Here we have Oregon with a chance to go 9-0, and you have 3 other teams with just 1 loss. Like, there's a very legitimate chance you could have 3 teams with only 1 loss in the conference at the end of the season. Like, if Utah beats Oregon, you will have 3 teams finishing 8-1, most likely. And that's not usually how the Pac-12 does it. That's not usually what happens in this conference. John Wilner, the Pac-12 insider, we all know well at the Wilner Hotline, he mentioned that the top four, Utah, USC, UCLA, Oregon, they're 15-0 against teams 5 through 12 in the conference. That kind of dominance at the top tier, it's not what we usually see in the Pac-12. And this is what we want to see in the Pac-12 in terms of, four heavyweight teams taking care of business regularly, avoiding those potholes, avoiding those ambushes. And so that is part of like the new reality. But precisely because the top four have been so dominant, if you have a win over another member of that top four and the other team doesn't have a similar win, then you need to elevate the team with that win. So Oregon has one of those poker chip wins over UCLA. USC does not. I think that rating the top four in the Pac-12 is pretty easy. You have to put Oregon first because it's unbeaten in the league. You put UCLA second because it beat Utah. And then you put Utah ahead of USC because Utah beat the Trojans. So right now, in terms of rankings, it should be Oregon, then UCLA, then Utah, then USC. But of course, USC is going to get its chance to rise up to the very top if it beats UCLA and then it gets to the Pac-12 title game. Yeah, it's right there for USC to be number one in the Pac-12 and number one, nationally in terms of all Pac-12 teams by the end of the season. So, like a lot of rankings questions in late October, early November, we still have a final month of the season for things to resolve themselves. But right now, Oregon beat UCLA. USC, unfortunately, didn't beat Utah. So you have to rank Oregon ahead because it has a high-end win in the conference and USC doesn't.
I will say it this way, in addition to everything that Matt relayed there, Daniel, it depends on who you have your trust and faith in that is doing the rankings. If there's just a smattering of teams that they kind of jockey position based on, okay, well, they lost, so we're going to drop them 5, and they won, we'll move them up 3, that sort of thing. And it's not exactly what you outlined, which you were somewhat cherry picking games. You can't do that either. You need to look at the complete resume of the teams, see how they've performed and what the results are against the strength of the schedule, I believe is the best way to do it.
Yeah, Daniel, absolutely. You don't nitpick after week 10 because we still have so many high-end deciding games left to play.
Our buddy Eric, who took a little shot at you, I think a kind little friendly pot shot as an Oregon fan, also says here it's a rematch, Oregon UCLA, I think, but I would rather it be USC so we could have the pleasure of beating them.
Hey, if Oregon beats USC in the Pac-12 championship game, I'm okay with that because if USC does get to the Pac-12 championship game, that means USC will have gone most likely 11-1, and that means USC will be in a New Year's Six Bowl. So, Eric, hey, if you win the Pac-12 championship game over us, that's fine because USC will go to the Cotton Bowl, and that would still be a absolutely fantastic result for Lincoln Riley and the Trojans this year. So, if the price of not winning the Pac-12 means losing to Oregon and getting to the Cotton Bowl, it's a good outcome.
Yeah. So what are the most likely results here within the Pac-12? So again, we'll start with USC. They beat Colorado and they beat Cal. They've got the game against, let's arrive at the final weekend. You got USC and UCLA sitting there at 7-1 in the Pac-12 at that point. Although I think UCLA still has a game against Cal, I believe, the next weekend.
Yeah, after the USC game, yes.
On that same weekend, as you mentioned, Oregon, Utah. And as the standings sit right now, we're looking at both of those teams sitting there with, although Oregon's got no losses at this point within conference play. So, if we see chalk, we're going to have an Oregon, and then we've got a free-for-all between the other 3. If USC goes ahead and beats UCLA, then they're going to lose the tiebreaker to Utah. Correct?
Well, if Utah loses to Oregon, which is I think right now the chalky outcome is Oregon holds serve at home against Utah. And, let's realize that Utah was missing Cam Rising, Tavion Thomas, Micah Bernard, Dalton Kincaid's hurt. Oregon's been great. So salute to the Ducks. They've been fantastic. And, Eric and other Oregon fans, like, hey, you have the right to throw it in my face because I thought Kenny Dillingham and Bo Nix were not going to be great this year. They've been great. I was wrong. You were right. I can own it. I'm a big boy. I'm going to take the L here on the Voice of College Football. But with all that having been said, Oregon is the clear favorite against Utah, and Utah is going to need the very best of Cam Rising. He has to be healthy and he has to play great for Utah to make that game a serious conversation. If Cam Rising is 70%, Utah is not going to go into Eugene and beat the Ducks. So if we're talking about the chalky outcome, I think the Oregon beating Utah, that is a clear chalk outcome. Like Oregon's going to be a clear favorite against Utah, and then USC UCLA is the coin flip because we don't know how healthy USC is going to be going into that game. I think if USC is healthy, I would definitely like USC over UCLA because I think that Lincoln Riley can absolutely torch UCLA's defense. I mean, and now UCLA fans will say, well, hey, we can torch you. True. But I think that if USC gets Eric Gentry back and he's reasonably effective for the UCLA game, that the USC defense can make just enough plays, kind of like this game against Arizona. Like USC UCLA, that game figures to be like what we saw with USC Arizona. Where one team scores in the mid 40s, maybe higher, and the other team scores in the high 30s. Scoring in the high 30s in USC UCLA probably means you're going to lose. So Oregon beating Utah would basically mean, in terms of the Pac-12 standings right now, if Oregon beats Utah, that basically clears the path for the USC UCLA winner to oppose Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game because the USC UCLA winner will finish 8-1. Oregon would give Utah its second Pac-12 loss. The Utes would be 7-2 if they lose to Oregon. If Oregon beats Utah, then USC UCLA is basically a play-in to the Pac-12 championship game. Obviously, as you mentioned, UCLA would then have to still take care of business the following weekend against Cal. One should expect that to happen. But really, the Oregon-Utah is the gateway game. If Oregon wins, then USC UCLA is a clear play-in game. And if Utah wins, well, then that muddles things up, and Utah would have head-to-head wins over both Oregon and USC. So Utah would really like USC to beat UCLA because then Utah would have double head-to-heads. That would certainly make the Utes more secure in their position. If UCLA beats USC, well, UCLA beat Utah, which beat Oregon, which beat UCLA. So you would have every team in that three-way would be 1-1 head-to-head, and you would go to the other tiebreakers. So really, Oregon, Utah would be the first thing. And that really sets up an interesting point. We haven't gotten the time slots yet for November 19th. I would like to see Utah, Oregon be a 12:30 Pacific, 3:30 Eastern game, because that game's outcome would then shape, exactly what the stakes are for USC UCLA. So if you had Trojans Bruins as a night game, they will know the Utah Oregon score, and they can then, that could be just a pure play-in game if Oregon wins, and then we could just basically have a USC UCLA playoff, essentially a semifinal to get into the Pac-12 championship game.
Once again, everyone, we're here every Monday night at 8 o'clock Pacific time. So get back here next Monday. Bring some folks with you. Herman says, hi, Mark. Happy Halloween. I know there are 2 signing periods and transfer portal periods. Do student athletes put themselves into portals? Do athletes select their future team like signing period? Well, they basically declare that they want to enter the transfer portal. They fill out whatever necessary paperwork online probably. that they need to, that notifies the school, and they go into the transfer portal. And at that point, from a within the rules standpoint, then teams can then contact and have interactions with those players. And then the recruitment ensues from there, much in the same way that it would for a high school athlete. So anything to add on that one, Matt?
Just like you have to file the paperwork on time. And like we remember this from Jordan Addison. Like, he had to file the paperwork. I think it was by midnight on May 1st or something around that time. And there was some drama about did he get the paperwork in? So really, it's just you have to submit your request and get the paperwork processed by the relevant deadline. And then once that happens, well, then like you're safely in the portal, and then you go about choosing your team. But like, choosing your team does not have to be concurrent with filing the paperwork. I can say that much about the process.
All right, folks. We hope to get Jay Curtis on here from Cal Sports Report to talk about the matchup with Cal and Justin Wilcox coming to town, coming off an 18-point loss to Oregon. Another scintillating performance from one Bo Nix with 412 yards passing in that one. Oregon looking good. Didn't necessarily just blow out Cal from the get-go, drive number one, but just kind of slowly pulled away throughout the game to win by 18 in that one.
All right, let's tackle this from Bart Willoughby since it's on the screen. No way SC could keep up with DTR, Charbonnet, and Bobo. Mr. Grinch has no answers. Well, Eric Gentry's an answer, but we just need him to get him healthy and get him back in rhythm. And we need Raylan Goforth to get back in rhythm and get healthy. If USC has its regular starting linebackers, like USC would have more of a chance. But of course, if Eric Gentry's not available against UCLA, that's a crusher. Like, if we get to that November 19th game and Eric Gentry's not on that field, that makes a huge difference. In terms of what USC's defense needs to do, well, I've kind of already alluded to it. Like, I'm not expecting USC to hold UCLA under 35 points, but in a game like this, first one to 50 could be the winner. So if you told me right now, Bart, and everyone else watching here on the Voice of College Football, if you told me right now UCLA scores 37 points against USC, who do you think's winning that game? I will comfortably take USC if you tell me right now the Trojans will allow the same 37 points that they gave up to Arizona. So, like, if you allow 37 points to a team, it's not as though you had an answer. It's not as though you figured out the opponent. It means that you got a few stops in the red zone. 37, like, we can do the math there. 4 touchdowns, 3 field goals. That you forced enough non-touchdown possessions. You forced a few field goals in the red zone. Maybe you came up with 1 interception, as USC got from Bryson Shaw. A lot of Trojan fans have wondered, where's Bryson Shaw? Where's Bryson Shaw? He stepped up. He had 7 tackles, a pass breakup, and a pick. Finally healthy. His dad tweeted during the week leading up to the Arizona game, he's finally healthy. So he makes a real impact. If USC has Bryson Shaw on the field and Eric Gentry and Raylan Goforth, that's a defense that can hold UCLA to 37 points. That doesn't mean the defense is going to, become rock stars all of a sudden. I'm not expecting that. I never have. But if you can just hold UCLA under 40, it's going to be good enough. So, Mr. Grinch, he's had a lot of answers this season. He needs Eric Gentry on the field. But the thing is, this has been the theme with USC throughout 2022, throughout the offseason, carrying into the regular season. The defense doesn't have to wear a cape. It just has to be good enough. And really, with a lot of bodies unavailable, it was good enough against Arizona. So people are going to lament how weak the defense generally was, but it made that handful of plays, bend, don't break. That's just the way it's going to be against a really good offensive team. So that just has to be the framework for this game against UCLA. Now, if you allow 49, 52, that's a disaster and an almost certain loss. But hey, if we give up 37 to UCLA, I am extremely confident that USC is going to get at least 38.
Matt, we're looking at a Pac-12 from top to bottom, and specifically more the important portion of the conference from 1 through 4 or 5. That's as good as, how far would you go back? Would it have to be the salad days of Stanford, Oregon 10 years ago to go back to a Pac-12 that was this capable, this deep?
Yeah, I think 2014 emerges as a year when you really had some quality depth in the Pac-12. Like Arizona State was a decent team that year, and UCLA was a decent team that year. Stanford, Oregon, and then Arizona. That year, Stanford won at UCLA late in the season. We were really looking forward. We in the Pac-12 were looking forward to a UCLA Oregon Pac-12 championship game that year. UCLA looked like the main contender to Oregon for much of that particular Pac-12 season. But Stanford, which has been UCLA's nemesis, mostly wasn't the case this weekend, but mostly, David Shaw was a real pain in the butt for Jim Mora Jr. And that 2014 loss, Mark, was really a game that UCLA hasn't recovered from until this year. Like it really took UCLA 8 years to regroup from that particular loss. But the larger point stands that 2014, I think, is a year when, the Pac-12 really had some serious chops. You could also say 2016 because of Colorado under Mike McIntyre, and then Sam Darnold with USC and the Washington team that went to the college football playoff. But I think that there was a little bit more depth in 2014. Like the Stanford team that did beat UCLA, I think finished 7-5 in the regular season. And it wasn't one of David Shaw's better teams. It was like the one team in that 5-year period that kind of slipped through the cracks, didn't really achieve well, but it was still a pretty tough team. So I would say 2014 has the most quality depth in the Pac-12. This year really recalls 2014 in terms of like the most recent year on that score.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question that football fans wanted to see Jim Mora's best team take on Oregon that season in a Pac-12 championship game because Arizona just wasn't up to it. That was a disaster. That was one of many early Pac-12 championship games that was just a no-go in regards to being competitive. And Arizona then also placed in the Fiesta Bowl and lost to Boise State that year. But a deep Pac-12 at that point for sure. And we see as many ranked Pac-12 teams at this stage in the season as SEC teams right now. There was a question about the percentage chance that the Pac-12 will reach the college football playoff.
Slim to none. I would say that if you are a Pac-12 fan and if you are a USC fan and you're spending time thinking about the playoff, which you shouldn't, let's just not think it's likely to happen. But you want Georgia to destroy the rest of the SEC. Like that's the thing you want to see happen. You want Georgia to beat Tennessee. And here's the bigger picture with why root for Georgia, because if you're thinking about the SEC championship game, which, a game that often sends, or not often, but has sometimes its outcome has sent 2 SEC teams into the playoff. So you want the particular SEC championship game outcome that makes the SEC a one-bid league in the playoff. And so if you're thinking about that, which team is more likely to beat Alabama in the SEC championship game? I think it's pretty clear that it's Georgia, right? Because Tennessee needed a lot of luck to beat Alabama at home with everything going its way. So if you get Tennessee versus Alabama in a rematch in Atlanta with a more of a 50-50 crowd split, you have to think Nick Saban's going to be up for that rematch. It's going to really tilt the other way. It's not going to be Neyland Stadium. It's going to be a very different vibe, et cetera, et cetera. Alabama, with a really good chance, if not a great chance to win that game. But then you put Georgia up against Alabama. Now, so Georgia's defense against a not that great Alabama offensive line. And, Georgia lost to Alabama in the SEC championship game a year ago. So even though Georgia is the national champion, there is some unfinished business for this Georgia team. And it's played in Atlanta, so Georgia gets the crowd advantage for that game. I would much rather think that Georgia, rather than Tennessee, is the team that can beat Alabama. And so if you beat Alabama in the SEC championship game, what does that do? Alabama's out. Alabama has a second loss. Tide can't do it. The nightmare scenario for USC, the Pac-12, and any other teams trying to get in, like TCU in the Big 12, for instance, the nightmare is Alabama winning the SEC title game, because then Alabama finishes 12-1 as the conference champion, and either Georgia or Tennessee, maybe even both, finish with one loss and become an at-large SEC team in the playoff. That's the nightmare. So really, you want Alabama to lose in the SEC championship game, or frankly, any prior point, but especially the SEC championship game, so that Alabama can't be a conference champion that gets that leverage into the field. So that really is the ultimate end game. You want Alabama to lose the SEC championship game, and I think that Georgia is the better bet to deny Alabama than Tennessee.
And really, we're going to get an indication on Tuesday night what the current committee values. We're going to get a lean on that and a peek behind the curtain in regards to what they size up between some intriguing type comparisons. And the comparisons that I will make right now would be the Pac-12 winner, i.e. if it's USC, as a one-loss champion versus a TCU, let's say one-loss champion in the Big 12, and a one-loss Clemson in the ACC, let's say, if South Carolina or Notre Dame's able to knock off Clemson and they still win the ACC, what kind of comparison is that going to look like in the committee's eyes? Again, for me, it's going to be based on resume. So I'm going to go through wins and losses, and I'm going to go through the wins and the losses, the performance on the field, and obviously the opponents, the schedule, and size it all up to determine how I would rank them. But this committee, who knows?
Well, I don't pay attention to these Tuesday ranking shows because, hey, folks, you remember 2014, right? You remember that in the penultimate ranking show in 2014, TCU was ranked third. And we all saw how much that meant. And TCU didn't stumble in its last game in 2014. TCU beat Iowa State by over 50 points. So if that number 3 ranking in the next to last ranking show of the season meant anything, TCU should have held its place. I mean, at least, if TCU was number 4 in the last the next to last ranking show in 2014, then you carve out a little bit of room for, Ohio State with the blowout of Wisconsin to leapfrog TCU for the number 4 spot. But it's the fact that TCU was third. You can't have TCU dropping multiple spots, winning a game by over 50 points. So that just told me that it's all a show. It's all just horses and ponies. It's all theater. Just meant to get people interested, tuning in. But at the end, we're going to put in the helmet school. I can't emphasize enough how that first year of the playoff in 2014 totally destroyed so many people's faith in an objective, straightforward process. It would have been better if there were 0 ranking shows that whole year and you just come in with your decision at the very end. But by bothering to put TCU third, number 3 in the heading into conference championship Saturday, and dropping TCU multiple spots, even though it won its final game by over 50 points. Come on. Oklahoma, if you replace TCU with Oklahoma or Texas, we know that would not have happened. It was because TCU was not a helmet school and Ohio State was, and that's the way this committee rolls because ESPN is pulling the strings.
Okay, Matt, I'm not saying you're wrong, but play along with me here because we both believe in tearing up the entire schedule and the resume each and every week and reconstructing the rankings based on what had changed for former opponents, for previous opponents. Some ascend, some decline. So that strengthens or weakens your schedule each and every week. Okay. Both these teams finished 11-1, whether we're talking TCU, Baylor, Ohio State in this scenario. And I don't personally know why Alabama and Oregon get a free pass. They both had one loss as well. It's just because they were expected and already had made their claim and they held their spots. Ohio State was not supposed to ascend to that degree anyway. So we'll wind it down to TCU and Ohio State. If you're doing that each and every week and doing that fairly and objectively, you don't think that there's a way that two teams can be razor close at 3-6, because we are talking about one-loss teams in major Power 5 conferences that their resumes could be that close, where one's 3 and one's 6, but it's not 3 and 6. It's 3, 4, 5, 6 bunched up together. And then the 6th ranked team goes out there and beats Michigan, who's not a great team, but still they beat a Michigan team that's far better than an Iowa State team on the same weekend. And then that number 3 team sits because they don't play a conference championship game. And number 6 goes out and beats the 13th ranked team in the country by 59 points. That's not a major boost to a resume.
But it's not, that is a really well argued set of points. First of all, want to absolutely give you credit for that, because it's true that just because it's 3-6, it doesn't mean that that's a large chasm. But it's more about TCU. Did TCU drop 2 slots in the pecking order based on other teams' movements? Let's remember Baylor beat Kansas State. I think it was by like 10 points. Solid win, home win, but nothing incredible. And so it was that TCU dropped multiple spots, not one. That's why I go back to the whole point of, if TCU was 4th, not 3rd, and Ohio State jumped over TCU, that one ranking spot to me means a lot. Because Ohio State absolutely thumped that Melvin Gordon Wisconsin team, so badly. If Ohio State and TCU were right next to each other, in the rankings, if they were 4 and 5, and you switch them one spot, to me that seems reasonable. Like I can allow for that. But TCU, you if this was in the middle of the season, Mark, if this was week 6, week 7, and the data points you have fewer data points and you don't know as much about each team and how good it was, that is generally when you can and frankly should have more volatility in rankings. You are moving things around the chessboard a lot more because you're not as sure of what each result means. At the very end of the season, when you have 12 or 13 games on your resume, the volatility should generally be less. And I know that Ohio State made that really huge statement that no one was expecting, not by that many points, not by anything close to that.
You were a 4 or 5 point underdog in that game because of their quarterback situation.
Yes. But it's that, did TCU having 12 data points, you suddenly drop them multiple spots? So it's not, because TCU dropped multiple spots, it isn't just a TCU Ohio State argument. It's really about the TCU dropping 2 spots more than Ohio State rising, because I can see TCU dropping 1 and Ohio State passing the Frogs. That's not what we had. We had TCU dropping multiple spots. And again, TCU won its game by over 50. So if TCU had beaten Iowa State by 10, we're not having this conversation. Then you can say, yeah, TCU just barely stumbled and was not convincing, didn't close the sale. TCU did exactly what it was expected to do. And it was at a position 3rd where it, ostensibly had even a little bit of a cushion. The going in, you're thinking, if you're TCU, if we blow Iowa State to smithereens, we're in. I mean, if that positioning means anything. But and TCU went out and did that. TCU did not fall short of that standard, dropping by 2 at the end of the season when you do have more data points, when you do have a greater sense of how good teams are. Like TCU got to that 3rd spot because its resume was better than other competitors through 11 games. Does game 12, despite doing what you're supposed to, merit a two spot drop? One thing on this with a USC connection. We remember 2003. USC pulverized Oregon State in that last game of the 2003 season. Did exactly what it was supposed to do. It's really a connection to TCU 11 years later in 2014. And yet USC gets passed over, even though Oklahoma got dump trucked by Kansas State in the Big 12 championship game. So, that's the kind of thing that if you're going to bother to have rankings each week, one of the things that means is if you get toward the end of the season, the rankings that you have at the end of November, those are weightier, more important rankings than in mid-October. Like, obviously the process should have integrity no matter what week it is, but like you can have a lot more debate in September, early October. At the end of November, there should generally be a consensus. I mean, there's obviously allowance for some disagreement on the margins, but there should generally be an awareness of, okay, these 12 games are better than those 12 games. These 11 games are better than those 11 games. And so when we get into that final week, how much does that last data point in the stack of 12 or 13, how much weight should that carry? You make the most eloquent and effective argument for saying, actually, yeah, that 1 point out of 12, like we're not talking about 1 out of 100, it's still just 1 of 12, should carry more weight rather than less. And I'm underestimating the weight we should give to that. So that's a fairly made point. It's well taken. But I do think that if you're going to bother to rank teams every week and you arrive at the next to last weekend and you put TCU 3rd in a 4-team setup and TCU does exactly what it's supposed to, you can't drop TCU 2 spots because you've already created the expectation for TCU or any team that would be 3rd in such a setup that, hey, if we take care of business, we're going to be in. And then TCU takes care of business and they're not in. That erodes faith and trust. And I think it was incumbent on the committee, if it was going to bother to put TCU 3rd, there was a responsibility to keep TCU in, provided that the Horned Frogs did their job. And I think that most college football fans would agree that 2014 season really undermined a lot of faith in that process. And that first year, boy, there needed to be a very transparent process. There needed to be organized criteria in terms of, like, this is the number 1 criterion, this is number 2, this is 3rd. We never had that kind of clarity, order, and transparency, so people were allowed to believe the worst, because it just felt at the end, they want Ohio State, Alabama in the Sugar Bowl. They want the TV ratings. They could claim with some legitimacy based on Ohio State's blowout of Wisconsin. Like, I do realize that Ohio State crushing Wisconsin really gave the committee a reason to put in Ohio State. And if that didn't happen, maybe Ohio State isn't elevated to that number 4 seed. I'm very cognizant of that. But nevertheless, because you didn't have structured criteria all along the line, and then you make TCU drop 2 spots despite a total blowout win, that eroded a lot of faith and trust for people around the country. There is no question about it. And it was a real missed opportunity, because in that first year, as you can well appreciate, Mark, and everyone watching here, in that first year, the college football playoff really had to get it right. Not just right in terms of the correct teams, but right in terms of, we can all understand the process. We might be able to debate who should have been selected, but we know what the values are. We know what the priorities are. Everyone's on the same page in terms of what you're supposed to value, what you're supposed to prioritize. If we at least had that, this playoff era would have been a lot smoother. But of course, we didn't get it.
3 counterpoints here, Matt. And I can't believe that I'm debating on the side of the College Football Playoff Committee because I'm totally against the process. I'm totally against the process, but I will make these points. One would be, and I don't believe this to justify the outcome justifying the failed or flawed process, but Ohio State did make them look good by winning the national championship. If Ohio State loses by 4 touchdowns in the semifinal game, and especially since TCU went to the Peach Bowl and completely annihilated Ole Miss, then it looks bad. So Ohio State bailed them out from the standpoint to say, see, we got it right. They should have been there. The other 2 points would be, and again, I don't justify that in any such way. I'm usually the guy that says the ends do not justify the means because it worked out in a sense. Point number 2, though, would be there are 2 different ways that this can be approached in terms of the resume. And I don't necessarily justify nor criticize either one. Let's say you have the thought process that while it's a resume ranking, you weight it toward the end, like the NCAA basketball selection committee wants to get the hottest teams in the tournament. Who is this team right now, not who they were in September. So let's say this team, like that Ohio State team, lost in week 2 and got better and better and better and better and better, versus, let's say, a team that came out gangbusters. And I'm not saying this is what TCU did, but a team that came out and looked like a national championship team the first 3 weeks of the season. Then they started to taper off and just get by teams and, let's say, hit a week 9 loss. And then, and that's how they arrived at their 1-loss season in a different way. That can be, there are 2 perspectives. One can be, we want the best 4 teams right now, the teams that are playing the best football right now. And somebody else can say, well, the game 1 on September 3rd to me matters just as much as game 12, 14 weeks later. I'm taking the full resume and each data point counts exactly the same. And then my third point would be simply the conference championship. The Big 12, in a sense, screwed itself by not definitively declaring a conference champion. So as we arrived at that place, the College Football Playoff Committee could rest upon, well, conference championships are paramount, and we have a league that did not foresee this conclusion and this issue with having a split championship and not having a declared champion to say, this is our champion.
And so here's where it's important to say that in subsequent seasons, think of 2016 with Big Ten champion Penn State not getting in over Washington. And then in 2017 with an Alabama team, which didn't even make the SEC championship game. That was Auburn versus Georgia. Auburn won the SEC West. In subsequent seasons, non-champions of conferences got in. And that just, reaffirmed retroactively that 2014 was not about conference championships. It was just about creating the most TV-friendly matchup. So, if we were to accept the idea that Ohio State was a clear, conclusive conference champion and the Big 12 messed up with that, one true champion nonsense in 2014, which definitely was a misplay by Bob Bowlesby. We all know that. But if the 2014 process was to be given more integrity, then subsequent years needed to honor that same principle, and they did not. So that is another piece to this puzzle.
Absolutely. And I don't know at the time if they definitively said that they did not, I don't think at any point said you must win a conference championship to make the playoffs, but they said that that's a huge factor. That was the thought process, and that was the argument.
And that's where we get into that lack of, this is the number 1 priority. This is the number 2. This is the third. We needed that kind of clarity. 1, 2, 3, 4. This matters most. This matters second most, so that we could all just compare at each stage. Not really a tiebreaker, but this is the thing that matters most. So all the teams can shoot for being the best in this realm. And if it's pretty even there, then you go to the second realm. That's what the 2014 season needed to provide. It did not. Trust and confidence were undermined.
All right, folks, we appreciate you all being here at the Voice of College Football for another USC show. We don't believe Jake Curtis will be able to join us, even though Jake is still backstage. I don't see him there. I was going to try one more time.
Yeah, we saw him. Just his audio wasn't hooking up.
Yeah, so I don't think Jake is unfortunately prepared to jump on the line with us this week. But it's USC and it's Cal. Golden Bears 3-5, 1-4 in the Pac-12. USC should win the game, but a 19.5-point spread at this point. Join Matt's work at Trojans Wire all week. And here at the Voice of College Football, we'll have USC postgame. And, of course, we've got a Pac-12 live chat show on Wednesday night as well. Matt, we appreciate you making this happen. I guess one more time, if we could try Jake. I see him sitting down there because I would like to acknowledge Jake. Jake, can you hear us? Hello, Jake. Jake.
I don't think anybody can hear me.
We can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
I can't hear you.
Cannot hear us. Well, that's unfortunate.
Yeah. Maybe we could type out some items for Jake.
Yes.
Hold on, Jake. Jake, hold on.
Jake, hang on just a second. There it is.
Okay. All right. Here goes. This is weird with no feedback. They've been not so good, and I think obviously the problem is the offense. They can't score. They can't move the ball, and the big problem is the offensive line. Until Cal gets an offensive line, they're going to be stuck in this middle of the pack at best. They have pretty good skill position players. The quarterback is not elite enough to challenge for a conference championship or anything like that, but he's good enough to compete in most games. Their wide receivers are good. Hunter and J. Michael Sturdivant are both very talented guys. Jay Knott looks like a future NFL guy, but he gets no room to run because the offensive line can't do anything. They've made tons of changes on the offensive line. In fact, none of the current positions on the starting five in the front are the same five that started in the beginning of the season. They've been moving guys around, and injuries. They've had some injuries, but not as many as a lot of teams have had. And then defensively, which is where they've hung their hat since Wilcox has been there. They have a couple of good players, but not great. The scheme is sort of keeping them in games until they played Oregon, that was the first game that the defense really couldn't do anything, and really the first game they got blown out because of their defense. They were able to stay in games, but against Oregon, they weren't able to do that at all. Sermon, the coach's son, Jackson Sermon, is a good inside linebacker, but their other three linebackers, the other inside linebacker and two outside backers are mediocre at best, and you need elite guys at that position to have a really good defense. Their safeties are pretty good with Daniel Scott and Craig Woodson. The quarterbacks have been so, not great. They have a true freshman who sort of worked his way into the lineup, who's going to be really good someday because he has good instincts, but he's a freshman now, and that's a tough way to go at the cornerback spot. I think Wilcox does not like to fire assistants, but he's going to have to make a big decision about Bill Musgrave when the season is over, I think. When Musgrave came, everybody thought everything was going to be fixed with the offense. All that NFL experience, 20 years in the NFL as an offensive coordinator at the pro level. You figure this guy is going to be able to do it at Cal. It hasn't happened at all. And it'll be interesting to see what Wilcox does with Musgrave. Like I say, I don't think he's ever fired a guy. He loses his assistants because they go elsewhere, and he sort of waits until they get a good job offer and then sort of says, yeah, okay, I think you better take that job. But I don't know what he's going to do with Musgrave. I don't think he plans on coaching forever. He's in his 60s, so I don't know how much longer he plans to keep coaching. So it'll be interesting to see what Wilcox does. I can't imagine that he can afford to keep Wilcox or to keep Musgrave after this season. The offense has just been terrible. Couple of things. The one thing I understand, well, he was working on an extension at Cal at the time, so it would probably been bad for him to bolt at that point. The other thing is, my understanding was that he would have been asked that for the staff there to tell him who his offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator would be, and that's not something a head coach is going to walk into very often. So I think a lot of it had to do with that. And Wilcox, he hasn't proven that he's a great head coach, but he's a really upstanding citizen, and he's not going to leave a situation just to go to another situation, even though it is noticeably better than the one he's at. Sometimes to a fault, his morals get in the way of being a great head coach. I think the assistant coach situation being an example. But I was surprised he didn't take the job anyway. He's not going to get fired. Wilcox isn't going to get fired at Cal for at least a couple more years, especially after turning down the Oregon job and signing a new extension just last year, a couple of weeks after the Oregon thing came down. So they're not going to fire him, but they may encourage him to do something about his assistant coaches. Hard to say. I guess through the air. I mean, the Trojans have a lot of interceptions. I would guess they'll try to over the short middle. I would guess with plays using their wide receivers. And Jaden Ott is a really good receiver, so they'll probably use him a lot. The problem is their offensive line is so poor that they don't give Plummer much time, and Plummer is not a real he's got some mobility, but nothing like the elite quarterbacks in the conference have. So he's been sacked, I guess, 23 times, 26 times, something like that, a lot. So I think they're going to have to go with a lot of short stuff, try going deep periodically on situations where, first down situations where perhaps the pass rush wouldn't be so great. They have receivers that can go up. Plummer has tried a couple of times, even when the guy's perfectly covered, just to put the ball up for Hunter and Sturdivant, and it's worked out pretty well. They usually come down with the ball. So I would guess they would try that a couple of times, even if their guy is covered. I think Plummer might put it up for, on passes that travel 40, 35, 40 feet, 40 yards in the air. Oh, the one that surprised me most was the Colorado game. Losing to Colorado at any site is an embarrassment. Their offense, Colorado has perhaps the best or the worst defense in the country, certainly the worst among a Power 5 team, and they scored 13 points against that team. That's kind of remarkable. The 49 points against Arizona surprised me at the time, although seeing what Arizona has done in the meantime, their defense, they're challenging Colorado for lack of defense. The difference is that Arizona has a pretty good offense too. But the Notre Dame thing didn't surprise me that much. It came right after Notre Dame had lost to Marshall. I guess if it happened now after Notre Dame beat Syracuse, it might surprise me a little bit. But Notre Dame was really struggling at the time. So that didn't surprise me a whole lot. I thought they had a chance. They had a chance in that game. They had on the Hail Mary on the last play, the guy had the ball on his chest for what would have been a tying touchdown, and it rolled off. So I don't think Notre Dame is a great team by any means. They're getting better clearly, but Cal certainly could have won that game. Until they get some offensive linemen, they're not going to be any good. And they haven't had any really good offensive linemen for a while. They got 2 in the pros now, and neither of them are starters. When they were good, when Cal was good, when Jeff Tedford was the coach, they had outstanding offensive linemen. And you can talk about Rogers and, Marshawn Lynch and all those guys. But the difference was that they had offensive linemen at the time. They had Alex Mack and Todd Stussy and Troy Ozzie and a lot of guys that played in the pros for quite a long time and were good pros. They just haven't had good offensive linemen for quite a while. Whether they have to recruit those guys or develop them, I don't know which way you go, but they just haven't had them. And until they do, they're going to be stuck in this situation. Very conscientious guy, very good defensive coach, until he finds a guy who can lead the offense or can recruit really good offensive linemen. I think it's going to continue this way. I mean, each year it seems like he's just about to turn the corner, and it never happens. And I think you're starting to wonder whether it's ever going to happen. He's an incredibly moralistic guy. When he loses, it's like he takes losses extremely hard, and he's really he comes to every press conference. He doesn't jump out of press conferences or anything like that. But he's really after the Colorado game, he was a mess. So I don't know whether he can survive much longer. He'll stay on, but I thought after they had that 8-5 season that they were really going to get things going. Just hasn't happened. And I don't see anything changing until they get an offensive coordinator and some offensive linemen to make it happen. I don't think so. I mean, I've seen a lot of things on the betting sites of David Shaw being very high up on coaches that are about to go. They're not going to fire David Shaw. This is Stanford. I mean, they have a different method of measuring success. And Shaw took him to the Rose Bowl a bunch of times. They're not very good right now, granted, but he has had considerable success. If anything, I would say Wilcox is more in jeopardy than Shaw, and I don't think Wilcox is in much jeopardy either. But Stanford's they're not going to fire David Shaw. The only way he would go is if he says, okay, I've had enough and I'm leaving. But I don't think that's going to happen either.
Matt, I'm out of questions. Anything else? Oh, you got another one here. Let's see.
The Stanford-Cal game is going to be the 40th anniversary of the play. So that's right. That'll be the highlight of that confrontation. I don't even know. I'm getting to the point now where a lot of people that are reporters now don't even remember the play. So it's not even that big a deal to a lot of people now. Well, Stanford is different. Stanford has a really hard time getting guys in. They don't lose too many guys on the transfer portal except as grad transfers. And Cal, I think it's discouraged. I don't think Wilcox wants to have transfers. They'll get it. They'll try to get a transfer for a specific situation. Obviously, they needed a quarterback, so they had to go out and get a quarterback. And they got one who was at Purdue and got replaced as the starter at Purdue. So it tells you something about what they got there. I think Wilcox is just reluctant to go the transfer route for a lot of guys. I think Stanford is closer. They've shown that they can do it at a very high level. The last couple of years have been bad, but they've had some really good recruiting seasons. And the problem, of course, with Stanford, is, like we say, is the transfer situation. They're not going to get transfers very often. And I don't know. It's too early in the transfer system of what it's been 2 or 3 years now that it's been going on to really tell the complete impact of it. I mean, Lincoln Riley is certainly making good use of it. But I think Stanford can get back, maybe not to where they were, but I think they can get back to being a challenger for the Pac-12 championship. Cal, I don't know. They just seem to be stuck in neutral. The recruiting is always so-so. They're looking for a specific kind of guy. I mean, Oregon State does that too, and they've been doing pretty good. Oregon State looks for a particular kind of guy, and they find a guy that fits their system, and Jonathan Smith makes it work. So I don't see why Cal can't do the same kind of thing. I don't know. I don't know if it's just as simple as getting a good offensive coordinator, but at this point, it sort of seems that way. Well, let's see. How does it feel today? I don't know. I came to California that year, and so I wasn't covering the big game that year. So I came to California just after that. But it's still a remarkable play. I still think it's the most impressive, amazing play in college football history, and there have been quite a few. Just the repercussions of it. You know, John Elway that was a great game before that play. Elway pulled off some fourth down passes, and if they win that game, they're going to a bowl game. And in fact, the bowl game guy was on the phone at the time when the kickoff is going off. And he says, "Okay, we just about got Stanford." And then there's this long pause that the guy at the other end didn't know what was going on. He goes, "We got some funny business going on here." And so, it ended up costing Stanford a bowl game. And Elway, for a long time, wouldn't talk about it and, talk about how it ruined his life. And there's all kinds of stories about the Stanford president going into the Stanford locker room afterwards and says, "Oh, don't take your uniform off yet. We're going to have to go back out there. They can't do that to us." There's, stories about the Stanford head coach going into the referee's locker room afterward and demanding that they go back out in the field. All kinds of weird stuff that a lot of people never noticed. But the trombone player is still in the Bay Area. He's a tech guy, Gary Terrell, and he follows me on Twitter, so I still connect with him periodically.
Just want to say, Jake, you can't hear us, but I just want to say you and Jeff Ferrato at Cal Sports Report, you do a fantastic job. Like, you guys, I know you're authorities on Cal Golden Bear athletics, just an absolutely brilliant job. So, really, for everyone watching here on the Voice of College Football, I mean, if Cal, hopefully, Cal becomes more relevant, Jake Curtis, really delivers the goods on.
Sorry
Cal
for the lack of bounce back.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Jake.
Thank you.
You know what's amazing about, he brought to light so many things about the current situation there at Cal, and then diving into the past. And thank you, Matt, so much for asking that question in particular. Matt and I were coming up with as many questions as we could. And of course, as usual, Matt's were more insightful than mine, but we both traded questions there. But going back 40 years, I just thought that was phenomenal there. You know what really hit me was at the end of his description about John Elway's response to all that was, here we are in 2022 with players opting out left and right, even for Rose Bowls and Cotton Bowls and Orange Bowls. And we had John Elway, who wasn't just going to be a fifth-round pick and play left guard for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the number one player in college football. And that meant that much to him to go to a bowl game as a 6-5 team.
Yeah, it would have been, the bottom of the barrel in terms of the bowl system. Because in 1982, there were like 16, 17 bowl games. Yeah. So that would have been like what, the Garden Salad Bowl or
remember the Garden State Bowl?
Yeah, it was a huge deal. It was a huge deal if you went to any bowl game back then. That's right.
Matt, I don't exactly know how old you are. I know you're younger than me, but do you remember like the Raycom days of watching like the Bluebonnet Bowl and the Liberty Bowl on Raycom? Loved it. Oh,
TCS Metro Sports?
Yes.
Remember that?
Oh, just, yes.
No, the Bluebonnet Bowl was one of my favorite games every year. Absolutely. Really look forward to that.
Bowl.
Also, like, 1980s nostalgia just takes me back. But like the Gator Bowl had top 5 teams in the early 1980s. Like you had Jackie Sherrill's Pitt Panthers.
Yep.
Hugh Green in 1980. Like in
Playing the
1980,
Heisman Trophy
the
winner.
Heisman Trophy top 2 in
George
the
Rogers.
Gator Bowl. That's
Yeah.
right. And you
Yeah,
also had either Al Michaels or Keith Jackson called the Gator Bowl every year. Just stop and think. Al Michaels, Keith Jackson, the best of the best, they always called, one of the two always called the Gator Bowl back then. So like you had an A-list treatment. You had at least one top 10 team in the Gator Bowl just about every year. Man, it was a different time. And just to know that like so many different bowl games felt like heavyweight battles. That was the stuff. That was the real thing. And I sorely miss it.
One of my first memories of college football, as soon as you brought up the Gator Bowl and it being a big deal, was the 1978 Woody Hayes Gator Bowl game. Was one of the very first that I saw. And that was a Clemson team that was 11-1, that won the ACC, played in the Gator Bowl. And even though that was, as growing up as an Ohio State fan, and this is right when I'm watching Ohio State football for the first time, but I'm ingrained in, how great it's been in Rose Bowls. The Gator Bowl was kind of like looked down upon a bit from an Ohio State perspective, like we're in the Gator Bowl this year, but that Ohio State team wasn't even ranked, and they just elevated them because of the name. We're going to put them into the Gator Bowl. And yeah, that was a Keith Jackson ABC primetime game that I'm sure got a enormous rating. The bowl season, I still enjoy the games. I still look forward to seeing the schedule hit as soon as the selection committee goes through its selections, and then later that Sunday night, seeing all the matchups. It's still magical to me, and I still love it. But to go to the days gone by of the 80s and 90s and the bowl games were just phenomenal. Yes,
absolutely. And I know that we all wanted, to have like a real national championship, like why Miami and Washington couldn't play. And it just reiterates for people who don't know, what Mark and I both have said in past episodes of The Voice of College Football. In the off season, we talked a lot about, the way things ought to be past seasons. We do some evergreen content in the off season. But if you haven't listened to either one of us, I mean, Mark and I are pretty much on the same page in terms of, the only thing college football needed, it wasn't a playoff. It wasn't the extended multi-team bracketed tournament. Just needed a +1 after New Year's Day style bowl games. Like give us a 1983 season, 1984 New Year's Day free-for-all, with Auburn and Michigan in the Sugar, and Miami and Nebraska in that classic Orange Bowl, and Georgia and Texas in the Cotton Bowl, and number 4 Illinois in the Rose Bowl. You had 7 teams legitimately in the hunt for the national title on New Year's Day. So that meant that you had 3 more teams with a legitimate national title aspiration compared to the 4 that you have in the playoff. So that was a way of involving so many more fan bases, so many more teams, so many more schools, and getting so much more regional balance and diversity compared to what you have with the 4-team playoff. And then if there's a dispute that still needs to be resolved, then you have that standalone game a week later. It would be like Miami Penn State 1987 Fiesta Bowl, but just after a classic traditional New Year's Day bowl setup. So a +1 that would have preserved the history and the tradition, and would have just given that modern, like Miami Penn State style solution. You would have had the best of all worlds. I just wish that college football would have been able to pull the trigger on that one.
Absolutely. And for as much as I defend the playoff, the reason I defend the playoff is because I think it's true to American sport that we want to see the champion determined on the field. But college football is sacred and it's historic, and we could preserve that, as Matt just outlined, and then add the new element when needed, that we get this +1 to determine. And then that just completely underlines and emphasizes and accentuates the importance of New Year's Day, even more so than it was then, which would be phenomenal. And there you have it. It's just, and I looked back upon those games that I made the statement as we were reviewing one of the years here recently, Matt, that we almost look back upon those games as being playoff games among themselves, bowl games, that there couldn't be a national champion that could result as a loser in one of those bowl games. Well, the new iteration of that would be they would be playoff games as in a sense. Yeah.
One more note about Cal before we close down the show. And, obviously Jake couldn't hear us, so we had to send our questions by keyboard to him. But just one thing to note about Cal before we close down. Joe Starkey was the radio voice for Cal on the play in 1982 against Stanford. He's still calling Cal games.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. So, and he was also the voice of the 49ers during their Joe Montana Super Bowl glory days, like his call of the John Taylor touchdown in Super Bowl 23 against the Bengals. Like, that's a widely replayed radio call. Yeah. That's Joe Starkey. So he's been calling Cal games since 1975, and this is his 48th and last year behind the mic. So this will be the last Cal Stanford game for Joe Starkey, a Bay Area sports legend. Wanted to duck that in, as kind of as a hat tip to Jake Curtis, because Jake Curtis is, a tremendous Bay Area sports journalist covering Cal. Wanted to express our appreciation to him for the job that he does, but wanted to conclude with that Joe Starkey grace note about one of the great voices in Pac-12 and West Coast sports broadcasting.
Well, thank you for adding that, Matt, because I would have been remiss on that one. I did not recognize that, even though I do recognize the name and those historic calls, of course. Before we get off here, we want to honor and recognize the super chat that came in from Georgia Reload. Thank you so much for that contribution, noting that is a Voice of College Football video going viral at 52,000 views. Yes, we posted a Michigan State take on Sunday night. With the caveat, folks, if you go back and watch that video, this is on Sunday night, and I was very open and honest about saying I would like more information, more evidence, more video evidence at that point. I'd seen one video. Therefore, what we did today, we went live on the Maine and Michigan channels from 4 to 6 for 2 hours, and we cleared up some points. We actually reviewed what Jim Harbaugh and Mel Tucker had to say at their news conferences to give a more a fuller and more complete look. Obviously, the investigation, we're nowhere near the complete look at where this is going to land. So I don't want to lead us down that path, but we had a better perspective on it about 12 to 16 hours later than we did on Sunday night. So keep that in mind. So be kind if you watch the video in regards to I make a few concessions to wanting to see some more information and evidence, and we did so later, which one in particular would be the 4 players that were suspended for Michigan State. In reviewing that video, I would think it be justified that more like 10 or 12 or 15 players would be suspended to some degree for their lack of getting involved, breaking up the interaction, and not doing the right thing. All right. Matt, thanks so much for being here. Is there anything at Trojans Wire that you'd like to hit on?
Well, first off, I just want to say, folks, you want to check out Mark Rogers' Big Ten Paradigm, his podcast. That's part of the College Gridiron Coast to Coast podcast network. I have Get Off My Pylon, focused on Western college football, Pac-12 and Mountain West. So you want to check out those podcasts. You can find them at Red Circle, also Spotify, Google, Apple, wherever you listen to your podcast. In terms of Trojans Wire, two things I want to spotlight in terms of what we've been writing about. One is that, we could have a situation where Tulane gets a New Year's Six bowl and USC does not. And more broadly, the group of 5 could have a 2 or even 3 loss champion, and USC could be 10-2 and be relegated to the Alamo or Holiday Bowl. And it just underscores the point that, we shouldn't give automatic bids in college football, that you should have to at least, go 10-2. I think if you're 9-3, it doesn't mean you should be barred from being able to get a New Year's Six game, but you should have really high quality wins if you're 9-3. So you're not prevented from going, but you shouldn't be first in line, which is what an automatic bid is. So we wrote about that, the Tulane USC question. And the other thing is, I wrote a piece, a fun little piece, because we're playing Arizona and Cal and Colorado, so not like huge games. So try to have a little bit of fun here. Who's coaching better in 2022? Lincoln Riley or Pete Carroll? Just toss that around. They're both doing tremendous jobs, but the former author of a USC dynasty and the current coach trying to build a new dynasty, who's coaching better? And I don't have a strong opinion, but like I compared and contrasted their two bodies of work this season with USC and the Seahawks. So lots of, trying to just be thought provoking, because we're not going to go deep into the weeds on Arizona or Cal, or Colorado. We're obviously going to provide a ton of analysis of UCLA and Notre Dame when we get to those games. But right now we're trying to do some think pieces. And of course, we cover USC athletics. So we're also getting ready for college basketball. But Pete Carroll versus Lincoln Riley, USC Tulane, New Year's 6, group of 5, how that should all work. Just trying to give you some creative things to think about at Trojans Wire.
Matt, thank you so much for staying late tonight and making this work. And we were grateful to get Jake on. But again, 26 consecutive shows with Matt, and we wouldn't have a show here on USC at the Voice of College Football without Matt. So check out the work at Trojans Wire in particular. Matt, we appreciate it.
Have a great week, Mark. Thank you so much.
We'll see everybody back here next Monday, 8 Pacific time.